Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be able to be with you today. I'd like to start by extending my warmest thanks and appreciation to the organizers of this event for inviting me to give this talk on the topic of the MyData paradigm. So my name is Viivi Lähteenoja, and I'm a senior advisor to MyData Global organization. I'm also the editor of the latest updated version of the MyData white paper that was published earlier this year. And formerly, I had the pleasure of serving as the Deputy General Manager for MyData Global. And today I have the privilege of sharing with you some thoughts, ideas, hopefully even some inspiration on what MyData is, where it comes from, and what it can do, both globally in the world and locally in Korea. So let's start with what MyData is. MyData is an alternative vision and a set of guiding principles for how we as individuals can have more control over the data trails we leave behind us in our everyday lives. So let's start with the vision. Imagine for a moment that you live in a world where you feel and where you can confidently say that my personal data is used to make my everyday life better and easier. And then imagine that you can also say that together with others, I am a powerful actor and my choices matter. And yet, again, imagine that you can say that I trust that my personal data is used ethically. This is the kind of world where I want to live in. And this is the kind of world that MyData envisions. This is what MyData means when we say that the goal is to reach a fair, sustainable, and prosperous digital society through a human-centric approach to personal data. This is the kind of digital society where people, individuals, and groups get value from their data and set the agenda on how it's used. And this is also the kind of society where the ethical use of data is always the most attractive and lucrative option for organizations and companies. But we're not there yet. So to reach this goal, MyData is about working towards three major shifts. These are the shift from formal to actionable rights, the shift from data protection to data empowerment, and the shift from closed to open ecosystems. I'll take you through these three shifts in a little bit more detail. When MyData talks about the shift from formal to actionable rights, this is all about making legal and other rights easy and convenient to exercise for everybody, and not just for the technically savvy. And when we talk about the shift from data protection to data empowerment, we really talk about a mental shift from this mindset where the person is seen as something powerless and passive and in need of external protection. A shift from this kind of a mindset to a new kind of mindset where every person is also seen as an active agent, not afraid, but confident in using and benefiting from all the data about them, because they understand how sharing and using data can help them. And finally, when MyData talks about the shift from closed to open ecosystems, this means a shift into a way of operating without industry or sector-specific silos and vendor lock-ins, into a way of operating where all sizes of companies can join and create benefit for people and societies as well as themselves using personal data. These open ecosystems will allow for more real choice between good alternatives for people and a more competitive market for businesses. So how do we get there? You'll remember that just now I described MyData as an alternative vision as well as a set of guiding principles. I've just described to you the vision, so let me now come to the principles. The first principle of MyData is the human-centric control of personal data. That people should be in the driver's seat when it comes to how data about themselves is being used. The second principle is the individual as the point of integration, whereby all flows of personal data don't bypass the individual, but rather go through the individual in question. Third, the principle of individual empowerment means supporting people's agency and confidence in personal data use. Fourth, the principle of portability, meaning data access, data reuse. This signifies making data as available as possible to people themselves. Fifth, the principle of transparency and accountability. This is the principle without which trust in data handling organizations just simply cannot be achieved. And finally, the principle of interoperability, which is a condition for the successful utilization of personal data across different sources, different silos, and different sectors. Next, let me spend a little bit of time talking about the infrastructure level of MyData, the practical approach that MyData takes to enabling the kind of data economy, the kind of data ecosystems that are consistent with the MyData vision and which apply the MyData principles. In the human-centric MyData operator model, a person acts as the point of integration regarding the data about them. So in this human-centric model, a person can control the use of personal data about them across services by granting or denying access to data, or by assigning services to act on their data. Now, some people could run the necessary technology to do this in a secure way themselves, but most people will want to rely on external service providers. These external service providers are what we call the MyData operators. They offer tools for people and organizations to manage multiple types of personal data coming from multiple sources. The key difference between the MyData model and the currently prevalent platform model of data is that in the human-centric MyData model, there are many service providers that together form ecosystems in which personal data is shared with high levels of trust. The infrastructure is not based on centralizing user information to a single service. Instead, the participants in the ecosystems have common standards, policies, and governance that enable interoperability and data portability. So compare this, for example, with a network of banks. So instead of being able to transfer payments only between its own customers, banks form an international network where payments can be made between customers of different banks. So let me describe to you the roles in such a human-centric personal data ecosystem, in which multiple operators form a network like the network of banks I just compared them to. The person in this figure is the role of the data subject as represented digitally in the ecosystem. So persons manage the use of personal data about themselves for their own purposes and maintain relationships with other persons, services, or organizations. And it's important to note, by the way, that these are roles that are described here in this figure. So a role is something that an actor in the ecosystem can take on, and an actor in an ecosystem can have more than one role in different contexts. So to continue, the operator role in this figure is the one responsible for operating infrastructure and providing tools for the person in a human-centric system of personal data exchange. Operators are the role that enable people to securely access, manage, and use personal data about themselves, as well as to control the flow of data within and between data sources and data using services, which are the other roles you can see there in the figure. So data source is the role that's responsible for collecting and storing and controlling personal data. And this is the kind of data that persons, operators, and data using services may wish to access and use. And on the other hand, a data using service is the role responsible for processing personal data from one or more data sources in order to deliver a service. And finally, the role of ecosystem governance is for actors that are responsible for managing, developing, and enforcing the governance frameworks for the ecosystem. And as I know you're all very curious about the operators and what they actually are like, since this is a brand new concept for many, I'll describe in short the operator reference model. This reference model recognizes 9 core functional elements of operators. And it's important to stress that not all of these elements must be present in each and every operator. But after having studied scores of what we refer to as proto-operators in the course of writing the white paper Understanding MyData Operators, we found that the most common types of operators have at least some of these elements described in this reference model. So first we have identity management. This handles authentication and authorization of individuals and organizations in different linked identity domains, and it links identities to permissions. Another functional element is permission management, which enables people to manage and have an overview of data transactions and connections, and allows them to execute their legal rights. This contains or includes also maintaining records of, for example, consents on data exchange. Next, we have service management, which uses connection and relationship management tools to link operators, data sources, and data using services. Value exchange, on the other hand, facilitates accounting and capturing value, which can be monetary or can be otherwise. So capturing the value which is created in the exchange of data. Next, we have data model management, which is all about managing the semantics, managing the meaning of data, including conversion from one model to another as necessary. Personal data transfer implements the interfaces, such as APIs, to enable data exchange between ecosystem participants in a standardized and secure manner. Personal data storage allows data to be integrated from multiple sources, including data that's created by the person themselves, in what's called a PDS, or a personal data storage, which it functions then under the individual's control. And finally, governance support. It's a functional element that enables compliance with the underlying governance frameworks to establish trustworthy relationships between individuals and organizations. This is crucial. And the other one, logging and accountability, which entails keeping track of all information exchanges taking place and entails creating transparency about who accessed what and when. So for more information on MyData Operators' work, you can go to mydata.org/operators. But to sum up this first portion of my talk, I just wanted to reiterate that the core idea of MyData, the shifts that we want to see, the principles that need to be implemented, the infrastructure that enables the kind of digital society we want, the core idea is that people should be in control of the data about themselves. So the MyData approach aims at strengthening digital human rights while also opening up new opportunities for businesses to develop innovative personal data-based services built on mutual trust. Next, I promised to tell you a little bit about where MyData comes from, to give you a little bit of context of what it is that I refer to when I refer to MyData. So MyData can trace its roots back to 2012, when an open data conference was held in Finland. Among all the sessions in all the conference, there was one that was dedicated to the question of personal data. Now, obviously, personal data can't be made openly available for everyone, but how could it be made more available, more open for people themselves? Soon, things started developing quickly. A working group around MyData was formed, and a Finnish language white paper followed in 2014. After the inclusion of MyData thinking in the Finnish government agenda, where, by the way, it has consistently appeared government after government, regardless of the party in power, an English language white paper on MyData was released. This was in 2015, and it garnered some international attention. The European Commission then convened a roundtable of PIMS, or Personal Information Management Service providers, in that same year, 2015. And in the following year, 2016, the new global MyData community first gathered in Helsinki at the MyData 2016 conference. In 2017, local MyData hubs began emerging around the world to form a MyData network. And after a collaborative effort, the MyData Declaration of Principles was released for the 2017 MyData conference. This is the document that describes the shifts and the principles of MyData, which I've shared with you today. The 2018 MyData conference hosted a planning meeting for the foundation of a new global nonprofit organization, which was formally founded in November of that year. Then in MyData 2019 conference, a process for understanding MyData operators kicked off. And this process culminated in the publication of the white paper Understanding MyData Operators, which took place earlier this year. And also earlier this year, a third updated English language edition of the original MyData white paper was published. Following the publication of the work on MyData Operators, in the second half of the year, the first companies and organizations in the world were awarded their MyData Operator 2020 award. And to bring us to the present moment, as I'm speaking to you now, preparations are well underway for the 5th annual global MyData conference, this time to be held entirely online, which is going to take place in December. So today, MyData and MyData Global, which is the international non-profit organization founded in 2018 and headquartered in Finland, MyData is a rapidly growing global phenomenon. As of today, the organization has some 500 members from over 50 countries, both individual people and nearly 100 companies and other organizations, including from Korea. The network of local hubs has grown to include MyData Korea and 26 other local hubs on 6 continents. And the MyData Operators work, which I mentioned earlier, is one of the emerging international thematic groups which tackles specific issues relevant to personal data, such as health, or design, or governance. The leadership of MyData Global is very diverse, And you'll notice it includes representation from Korea in the form of the vice chair of the organization's steering group, whom you see here in this slide. Next, I did promise some thoughts on what MyData can do. I know that MyData thinking and doing in Korea is very strong in the finance sector, and the world has a lot to learn from Korean accomplishments in this field. But it's important also to remember that finance is not the only area where MyData can do great things, because personal data is everywhere. Just imagine the possibilities of applying MyData and the things learned from the finance sector in Korea, the things like health data, to education data, to mobility data, and so on. Further, I know that the regulatory and legal implications of MyData are well understood in Korea. And here again, it's important to note that there's even more to MyData than just regulation. MyData affects whole societies, from the technologies we deploy to the kinds of businesses we run. The human-centric approach is the key to innovation, to better technologies, and to more profitable business models, to enable that fair, sustainable, and prosperous digital society for all of its members, individuals and companies, for groups of people and organizations of all kinds. The human-centric paradigm that I've here described has the unique power to combine high data security and protection with optimal data use to benefit individuals. It also has the power to combine individual people's interests with the interests and benefits of businesses and companies. And thirdly, it also has the power to minimize risks and to maximize opportunities for societies as a whole. And finally, I'd like to share some thoughts with you about what you can do next, about how you can learn more, and about how you can engage more. The first thing you can do is learn by reading the very, very short MyData Declaration. And thanks to the incredibly hard work of the MyData Korea Hub, the declaration is also available in Korean language. You can also read the white papers that I've mentioned in this talk. These are the third revised edition of the MyData white paper here on the left, and the new paper called Understanding MyData Operators here on the right. And the best way to learn, of course, is to do it together. MyData is not a finished product. We are all in this together, learning, developing, and going forward. You can engage with the incredibly active global community and come say hi to me as well in the MyData Global Slack space. You can join it directly through the link there. No special invite is required. And finally, you and your organization can join as members of MyData Global. This is a way to show your support to the global movement for human-centric personal data, your support for the MyData Korea Hub, who are working tirelessly towards this new paradigm of personal data. I firmly believe that together we can make it happen and we'll make it right. So thank you very, very much for your time and attention today. And please do reach out to me via your preferred channel at any time with any questions or comments. I would be delighted to hear from you. Thank you. So thank you very much for this really, really good question. Concerns over personal data misuse and abuse are very, very real in Korea and elsewhere in the world. And they should not be ignored by any means. So this is why strict cybersecurity measures on a technical level and appropriate data protection legislation, combined with ethical and non-exploitative business models, are key components of the MyData paradigm. Because people's well-being is the goal, and that cannot be compromised. It is, however, vital to understand that these considerations can be combined with extensive data use. When we place the person in the center of the data about themselves, we empower that person to make the right choices for herself, whom to trust, with what data, and for which purposes. Korea's data economy, just like the global data economy, is enabled by the availability of data. And this availability of data, on the other hand, is enabled by the trust that people have in the organizations who handle their data. So adopting the MyData model and adhering to its principles is a fantastic opportunity for organizations, both businesses and government agencies, to be worthy of that trust, and so to have access to the data that they need. So, long story short, to the civil groups that are rightly concerned about potential security risks involved with making more personal data available, to them I would reply that yes, your concern absolutely is valid, and in order not to stop at pointing out problems only, and to be proactively part of the solution, I say demand of all organizations that handle personal data that they too adopt the MyData principles. Demand that they commit to the ethical and trustworthy handling of personal data, and keep them accountable for that commitment. In this way, you can work together to ensure both the security and the utility of data for the whole Korean society. And another excellent question, thank you. So yes, MyData is about having more personal data-based services, and it's also about having better privacy and data protection. MyData is about you making the right choices for you without having to compromise either the benefits that are possible with sharing data or the security that privacy brings. Because this is the truly remarkable thing about the human-centric paradigm shift. You don't have to choose one over the other. When I'm at the center of the data about me, in control over what happens with that data, I can allow for its use for my benefit and know that it will be only used in ways that are respectful of my privacy as I define it. I can really have it both ways. Thank you.